All right. Well, welcome back to the Transfer Portal CFB podcast YouTube channel presented by NoContextCFB. We're glad to be here today with our 2023 SEC preview podcast. Probably going to be one of the more sought after ones, just with how well followed that league is. Today, I'm joined by Dan Keegan, Mitch Mason. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Ready to talk some ball. It just means more in that SEC.
That's right. This is going to be a lot of fun, Parker.
Yeah. But yeah, before we kind of dive into everything, just want to remind you guys again that our official 2023 College Ball Previews magazine still for sale. Link on our webpage for $9.99. Chock full of a lot of just in-depth coverage of every FBS program, plenty of feature pieces on players, as well as a lot of FCS coverage, superlatives, and a lot more than that. So be sure to check that out if you can. Also, Home Field Apparel, one of our sponsors, you can use code PORTAL at as well. And then our MyBookie access will be linked in the description as well on this video. But to get into the meat and potatoes of it, just kind of the storylines entering the SEC this season. You've got UGA looking like they have dethroned the kings of the conference in recent years in Alabama. Nick Saban and co fuming over in Tuscaloosa, looking to kind of make their way back to that top level, and now dethroned Kirby Smart, one of his former prodigies, I suppose. And then you've got LSU, South Carolina, Tennessee, A&M, et cetera. A couple teams that seem, a handful of pieces away from being in that top tier, but could certainly challenge them this year. I mean, UT and LSU both beat Bama last year and had some pretty, semi-competitive games with Georgia, as difficult as that usually is to even have a semi-competitive game. So they're still rising up to the challenge. You got some new faces in places. Hugh Freeze at Auburn, obviously very notable. Zach Arnett at Mississippi State taking over coaching positions. Devin Leary transferring over from NC State to Kentucky, looking to change that program. Graham Mertz, does he end up being the starter at Florida over from Wisconsin, revitalize his career? As is typical with the SEC every single season, there's coaches, seats are heating up immensely. Jimbo Fisher, it seems like every offseason in the past couple of years have been talking about his. Not that he's in a great risk of being fired, but the pressure is building if he doesn't have a successful year this year. Billy Napier at Florida, a really tough situation in his second year, with the cupboard being a little bit bare in terms of the potential for immediate success this year. And then Elijah Drinkwitz at Missouri kind of needs to get out of that, era of mediocrity right now, eclipse that 6, even 7 win mark, really, to kind of solidify his job and get kind of the hounds off of his back. And then outside of the head coach, there's a ton of new coordinator hires, especially offensive coordinators. Kirby Moore at Missouri, a big one that Drinkwitz is hoping will come in and change things. Plenty has been talked about with Bobby Petrino at Texas A&M and what that's going to look like in the fall and how entertaining that might be to follow. Tommy Rees at Bama, another one. And we'll touch on plenty as we kind of get into it. So, per usual, plenty to talk about in the SEC this season. And we'll kind of get started on our team-by-team breakdowns.
All right, so we're going to go team by team through the conference. We're going to run not East and West like you often hear. We're going to go by tier. We're going to start with a championship caliber tier. We put 4 teams in that tier, and we'll start right ahead at the top, the defending champs. Obviously, you're the defending champs 2 in a row. You're in the championship caliber group. They do replace Stetson Bennett, quarterback. They replace Jalen Carter on the interior on defense. And I think a big one for the Georgia Bulldogs, Todd Monken, offensive coordinator, is gone. I think he really elevated that play calling and that scheme there, and he and Stetson Bennett really clicked. They seem to really be on the same page. Will Mike Bobo achieve the same things? Some of his offenses have been kind of uninspiring throughout his career. Are the new quarterbacks, Carson Beck, it looks like, is in the driver's seat. What do you all think? Is Georgia in line for a three-peat? Are they going to drop 1? Are they going to drop 2 in the regular season? What are you thinking, Mitch?
Guys, it's really hard not to see Georgia at least defending as the East champion, right? I mean, you get into the playoff and like Michigan found out, you mess around and anything can happen. But this schedule that Georgia has is just not that tough. They do go to Auburn. Florida is an away game. They're the away team for the cocktail party, and they go to Tennessee. So maybe they trip up and lose one of those games. I do think Mike Bobo, or I think for Georgia fans to just expect the offense to be the same with Mike Bobo calling plays instead of Todd Monken, I think is probably a misstep. But at the same point, Georgia's kind of become a Fortune 500 company, right? It runs itself. The offensive line is one of the most unsung units in the country. And I think that is certainly something worth pointing out, especially when you have a new quarterback taking over. They don't have an elite wide receiver core, but that hasn't stopped them in the past. And so the defense is rock solid. That's going to be one of the best units in the country, if not the best unit in the country again. I do think the question about the offense could be what holds them back. And if they lose a game late in the season to Tennessee, that might be why.
I think, yeah. I mean, your point about the scheduling is there is less of a margin for error for them this season than there has been in years past, which is interesting because you can also think that they've gained the benefit of the doubt with obviously winning 2 championships in a row. Even if they drop a close game, a lot of people are still going to be saying, "Oh, it's Georgia." But yeah, that Tennessee game being late in the season, sometimes losing a late season game can kick a lot of teams out of the playoff race. I like how you point out Fortune 500 company. I usually liken them in Alabama in years past to a factory. You pointed on the offensive line. They're producing offensive linemen at factory-like efficiency, defensive players, across the board. It's NFL draft picks every single year. This year will be the exact same. I like the potential of that quarterback room, honestly, to get to a higher level than what they were at with Stetson Bennett. That's no guarantee by any means, but I think the receiving core, I think Dominic Lovett is a name, Missouri transfer, to watch out for. He's going to come in, I would estimate, steal that wide receiver number 1 role, at least, sharing it with McConkey maybe. But I think plenty of weapons to throw to. Kendall Millen, that running back, is going to be really solid this year too. And you look at Tennessee, that's the road game. That's the one everybody's going to circle. Ole Miss comes to Athens. You're not fearing that too much. Carolina game is set up nice because it's so early and it's in between a bunch of non-conference games. And Carolina will already have played North Carolina, maybe a bit banged up from that game so soon after. So it sets up really well, as it has for these past couple of years with Georgia. So, I mean, the credit has to go to Kirby and the system they've made and how it is. I almost liken it to a more modern what Alabama was in the 2010s, late 2000s. It's the modern version of that, to where he's mastered, I think all of the NIL and transfer portal stuff that he can, while continuing on that Saban mantra of, intense, at least on-field discipline and players being accountable and just an incredibly high talent level. So, yeah, I mean, we'll touch a little bit on it later on how Georgia season might progress, but I see undefeated or bust, really, at least regular season for them. You don't look at any game on this schedule unless Tennessee puts everything together, and you're not really afraid of anything if you're a Georgia fan.
Yeah, absolutely. You did touch on the discipline of Alabama and that. So there are definitely the whispers around the Georgia culture. I think for me, Nick Saban's superpower the last couple of years, during his dynasty, has been keeping accomplished rosters hungry to win a title and to come back the next year and still have guys that were on the pinnacle last year and still just as hungry as a team that hasn't been there in 100 years. And Kirby showed last year that he also had that superpower. He brought that to his team last year in chasing a second ring. At some point, does that fray? How many is that locker room still going to be hungry for a third at some point? And that might not matter until November or January, but because I do think they'll be playing in January. I think we can probably all agree that seems likely, at least. But so let's flip over to Bama. They are hungry for the first time in a couple years, really. They weren't actually in the discussion realistically for the playoff, despite Saban's politicking there at the end of the season. Now Bryce Young is gone. Now Will Anderson is gone. What are we seeing from Alabama? Are these new faces stepping up? Is a roster going to be deep enough to replace these upper echelon players? Do we think that Tommy Rees is going to bring back kind of that slower, man ball Alabama style and not the Lane Kiffin, Mike Locksley, Steve Sarkisian era Alabama? Is it going to look like 2012 again in Tuscaloosa? Are we buying in? I don't know. I've talked myself into Alabama twice this offseason and then talked myself back out of them. So I'm up and down. I could see 12-0. I could see 9-3. I don't know. Tell me what you all see.
Well, if you listen to what people had to say about SEC Media Days, they talked about how even though there's all this praise being heaped on LSU, there's all the attention on Georgia, can they three-peat? Tennessee's a rising star. South Carolina is coming up. Folks were adamant, though, that Alabama had the swagger about the program that they need in order to get back to the top of the division. Right now, everyone's going to point to the quarterback situation and to the offensive coordinator. And listen, if Tommy Rees is calling my offensive plays, I'm not exactly super confident that we're going to outscore your team. Same with their quarterback situation, right? Jalen Milroe last season was not a QB1 in the Southeastern Conference. Could he be at the Division I level? For sure. He's an amazing athlete. But when it comes to polished passing, I didn't see what it took to get the job done. So for me, that's the biggest question for Alabama. And yet they're the Crimson Tide, right? Like, it is really hard to talk yourself into even a 2-loss season, in my opinion, just because that's not what Nick Saban teams have done very often, right? I predicted a Nick Saban revenge tour last year. I whiffed, but I wonder if somehow I was just a year early on that.
You might have whiffed, but you were like a field goal and a 2-point conversion away from being right.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That's what's so funny about it all. It seems like every year that Bama doesn't reach, playoff championship level, it's because one field goal, one kick six, it takes something extraordinary to really keep them out of that. And I don't see that happening, 2 years in a row where they're not kind of standing at least in that Final Four. So yeah, I mean, I do think there are more question marks on this roster than there have been. I mean, for me, growing up and watching this sport, Bama every single year was the standard, and they were the perfect team that you followed. They are no longer that team. They've showed some weaknesses in recent years. I would go. We talked a lot about Tommy Rees. I could go out on a limb and say that because of how well established Saban is there, being an offensive or defensive coordinator at Alabama is as pressure packed of a position as most head coaching jobs at the Division I level, because you are scrutinized so heavily. If the offense or defense isn't working, it's not Saban's fault. It's going to be the coordinator. And that's why they rotate through guys so frequently, either because they are very successful and they get looked at by other programs, or they don't meet that standard. Reese is going to have a lot of pressure on him this year. He's working with Milroe. Got some other names still in the mix, but Milroe, at least at this point, seems to be the front runner. I think a lot of with him, this, at least offensively, Bama might win a championship in the offseason with how far Milroe has come this offseason as a passer, as an SEC level quarterback in general. Obviously touched on a great athlete. I think, Dan mentioned, do we go back to 2012 Alabama? I think this is an opportunity Bama to go a bit more run heavy this season. You don't have an exceptional wide receiver core, but Jason McClellan, a really solid running back. You've got a pretty solid offensive line in front of you as well. And maybe they go back to a more run first, defense first approach, kind of back to those throwback days. I'm sure Saban would love that as well. That's kind of his bread and butter. So could definitely see that happening. I like Milroe's athletic ability. I think, Bama, they're going to scheme an offense around him that will make him successful. But it's going to be interesting because the schedule is not, we talked a lot about Georgia's schedule. The schedule is not nearly as easy. You got Texas coming in Tuscaloosa, which definitely will be favored, but that's a Texas team that last year took you to, had to hit a game-winning field goal with a minute left to get out of Austin. And then Tennessee's still on the docket. Got to go to College Station. Last time they played there, they lost, obviously. LSU is still going to be an issue in Tuscaloosa regardless. And then Auburn always trips them up in Jordan-Hare a couple times when they shouldn't. That could be the win that, gives Hugh Freeze his kind of a highlight of the season. So it's going to be tricky. I think Bama's in a position where, yes, should be favorites in the West. I think they are just pissed off beyond belief, not even just at Georgia, but losing that game to LSU, not winning the West again. I am interested to see how they come out. After that revenge tour, I was same boat as you. I thought this is Bama revenge tour. Everybody's talking too much about Georgia last year. Bama's going to come in and sweep the floor. They didn't. Is all that talk going to be backed up this year? And will Saban and them kind of be able to deliver? A lot of it comes down to quarterback. A lot of it comes back to them just getting back their identity, to be honest, in my opinion.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that unfolds in Tuscaloosa. And we have, I think, two understudies. These two teams are also, playoff contenders, bona fide SEC championship contenders, but they are a step below the two proven dynasties that we have going right now. And that's Tennessee and LSU. Let's start with the Tennessee Volunteers. Just an absolute dream season last year. It ended kind of a nightmare there in Columbia as Hendon Hooker tore his ACL and Spencer Rattler went supernova, but it was a dream season. Josh Heupel got that program back to the heights much faster than I think anybody really saw coming. That veer and shoot offense was unstoppable with Hooker and those wide receivers, and the offensive line was incredible, but a lot of personnel turnover on offense, a lot of personnel turnover. The secondary was shaky last year. Alex Golesh was the play caller in that offense, and he's off to run the USF program now. Heupel taking the reins over back, maybe calling the plays. I'm not sure. So we'll see what happens there. Does that offense hit the same highs with the new personnel? Can they repeat? Can they get even better?
It's really tough because it feels like they captured lightning in a bottle, right? Last year, the Herculean win over Alabama at home last season. This year, the schedule is very, very difficult. They go to Florida early on, which I think is going to be a big prove it game for Billy Napier. UTSA comes calling in week 4. I think a lot of folks may start to realize that game's on the schedule, but at least when we previewed it, a couple of weeks ago, a lot of the feedback was like, "Oh shoot, I had no idea that the Roadrunners were going to Tennessee." Right, so Texas A&M after the bye week, Alabama. It's a tough schedule. They end with a plucky UConn team, Missouri, Georgia, and then obviously Vanderbilt. Joe Milton has not proven that he can be the kind of winner that Hendon Hooker showed last year. So I feel like a defense that I don't think can be much worse than they were, certainly in the secondary last year, might not have high expectations, but the offense certainly does. I don't know that I'm down on Tennessee, but I think 10-2 for me is kind of their ceiling this year. I just don't think that they can do more than that without the production and the returners that they had a season ago.
Yeah, and I think the point about the schedule is really key. I mean, that Florida game, again, Tennessee, they've managed to knock out Florida a couple times in the past couple of years, but this is still a rivalry dominated by Florida. Tennessee hasn't walked into Gainesville and won since 2003. That is just the mental hurdle of that, especially early in the season, is going to be very difficult to overcome. A&M comes to Knoxville. That's not going to be an easy game. You obviously have to go to Bama, to Lexington. Georgia comes to Knoxville. It's setting up a lot of swing games for them, and swing games really come down to, well, does your team live up to their expectations or not? I think offensively, Joe Milton, obviously the key, and a lot's been talked about him. Around him, I think I could go out and say Jalen Hyatt, a different type of weapon, yes, but minus him from last year's team, I think this is a better skill position group, because I think Brew McCoy, really great all-around receiver, played in kind of a mostly third wide receiver role to Tillman and Hyatt these past couple of years. I think he's ready to explode. Ramel Keaton, Squirrel Wright, two guys that in spare action show that they thrive within Heupel's offense. An Oregon transfer, Dante Thornton, they've been talking about a lot. So you got 4 high-quality names at receiver. Jalen Wright, Jabari Smaller back at running back, 2 guys that are incredibly effective, very physical runners, and have been a great tandem for years now for Tennessee as well. Offensive line is where things might get a little bit more questionable after some losses, but it's going to all come down to Joe Milton, of course. Defensively, this is going to be the theme of probably most of Heupel's teams at Tennessee. Is this defense going to be good enough to bring them to a playoff level? It gives me shades a little bit early on of Lincoln Riley's Oklahoma, where the offense was always there. Is the defense going to be good enough to take them to that next level? You got some stars in Tyler Barron, Aaron Beasley, Jalen McCullough at each level. Is the depth there to really, run the table, take people by surprise? I don't think so. And I worry about this team in the trenches, is why I kind of shy away and say, 10-2 ceiling. I think 9-3 is realistic. I think that UTSA game, because I come from a family of Tennessee fans, and, they look at UTSA and they're like, oh, Texas San Antonio, that's fine. Easy win. I am intrigued to see September 23rd when they walk into Knoxville, and that stadium might be a little stunned when Frank Harris goes for 300, 350, 4 touchdowns, and they get in a shootout. It'll be fun to watch, I think.
Hey, guys, quick question before we move away from Tennessee. Where's the line for the Volunteers this year between a successful season and maybe disappointment or failure? Is it at the 10-2, 9-3? Is it an 8-win season? Like, it's really hard to kind of stick my thumb on what would be a successful season in Knoxville after last season.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm kind of down on Tennessee as a championship contender. Like, I don't think they're going to go 12-0. So what I saw as a Missouri fan during the Josh Heupel and Drew Lock years, Emmanuel Hall and those guys, if you remember, is that offense, when it has the same talent, the same, Jimmys and Joes as the defense, you have a advantage because of the numbers, because of the system that it creates. It's like a modern triple option. When you have better talent, it takes care of business. You will beat that better talent by 30. You will beat them by 4 touchdowns. When the other team has the talent advantage, you're kind of toast. It's kind of the opposite of what the Flexbone Academy triple option does in closing that gap. They will shut it down. At Missouri, there were 4 or 5 teams in the SEC every year that could do that. At Tennessee, there's one team that has better talent. Unfortunately, that team is in your division. And I think that Georgia kind of has a trump card over them. And they're going to control the run game with fewer numbers than anybody else in the country can do. And then play ball in the secondary and take away what they want to do. And there's one roster in the country that can do that right now. So I think Tennessee fans might think that beating Georgia is the standard, but I think that that's misaligned perspective. And I think 10-2 would be one trip up to me. You're going to lose one. You're going to lose to Georgia, and then you've got one other loss there, and that's still a really good season. It doesn't have to be 12-0 to be successful. 10-2 is still really good. Now, does the fan base agree with me? I don't know. Parker, you're closer to them than I am.
Having grown up a fan and having watched many 5, 4, 6, 7 win teams, 9-3 sounds fabulous, at least to my family. But yeah, I think 9-3. I think 9-3 is a good mark for Tennessee to shoot for. You expect a step back from 11-2 last year, and the schedule does set up a little bit less favorably the first time. It does, but I mean, the standard every year for the next couple of years is going to be how do you fare against Georgia, and I think it's going to be incredible, the chess match that we're going to see, not just this year, but years down the line, of Heupel versus Kirby Smart and their defensive and offensive staffs, and how they're going to keep trying to one-up each other. Smart won the first round last year. I would believe that Heupel has spent at least a considerable amount of time studying not just that film, but all of Georgia's film this offseason. How can we break down that defense to where we're not scoring 13 points and we're winning the SECs? I think it's going to be a big prove-it year for Heupel as a coach. He's not going to have all the talent kind of ready-made for him that he had these past 2 years, although he did do a great job at bringing Hooker along. But I think this is where he's going to prove himself as an SEC caliber coach and how he can adjust and then also just maintain that level of success from last year to this year.
I think as long as Tennessee is running this offense and has this functional NIL war chest, which I think probably both of those things will continue, then I think that they should at least be Penn State or LSU. Like, you are the clear number 2 in your division, and you have to hope for a breakthrough to get past that massive roadblock that's ahead of you. And Penn State hasn't, and LSU has a couple of times in the past decade. So I don't know. That's how I see that. So speaking of LSU, they have broken through twice. They've got some rings in the past decade, and a lot of people think they're a dark horse to pick up another one this year. Built on an incredible first year by Brian Kelly, another batch of tremendous transfers coming in, Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier, best QB room in the country, maybe best combo. Sorry, they're not better than Williams or Drake, but is the best 1 and 2 duel. You got Harold Perkins, one of the best defensive players in the country. You have a great wide receiver, Malik Neighbors. The top end talent is undeniable. Is the depth here enough to go undefeated in the SEC?
Yeah, I think they could. And to be honest, I have to squint to find a loss outside of the Florida State game in the opener. I have to squint to find a loss on that schedule. To me, the hardest game that they have in the first half, quite frankly, I think is going to Missouri. I think the Tigers are going to be a little plucky this year. So Dan, I know that makes you happy. Listen, Auburn, I think, is going to be much improved from last year. I don't really know what to expect from the Mississippi schools, to be quite honest. You talk about a talent gap. I mean, Mississippi State is overhauling everything. I'm not really a believer that Ole Miss wins kind of tough games. And so I think LSU has a really good chance to walk into the bye week 8-0. Then the question is, do they beat Bama on the road? Can they hold off Texas A&M at home? I think a lot of that depends on what's going on around and outside of Baton Rouge, right? Has Bama figured out the offense? Has Texas A&M cratered, or are they actually, playing up to the talent that they have on that roster? It's going to be a fascinating season, the SEC, but I'm personally against picking most teams to go 12-0. I have a really tough time just saying, yeah, that team is going to run the table. So I do think LSU loses a game, maybe two, somewhere along this schedule. But to me, they are, aside from the defense has a lot of transfers, and I'll talk about Mason Smith in a little bit and why I think he's going to have a great season. But aside from the defense, that offense is kind of ready to go. I think Jalen Daniels is really going to be fun to watch once again. So LSU is absolutely a contender. I don't think they're being overblown this year, but at the same time, I'm not ready to just crown them back-to-back SEC West champions. It's going to take a lot of thought, I think, for me to crown an SEC champion.
Yeah, and I think the thing about it, LSU, Tennessee, we group them together. They're in such similar scenarios where you largely overachieved last year, took a lot of people by surprise, knocked off a couple of the big boys that you weren't expected to do. How do you follow that up? And LSU is in a slightly different scenario where their roster is a bit more, or held a bit more serve, at least in terms of offensively with Daniels coming back. But it's going to be similar to Tennessee. I think the schedule is more difficult this year for LSU. You got the Florida State game that they lost last year by 1. Going to be very difficult again in Orlando this time, and then obviously getting Bam on the road. That's the one everybody's going to circle. I like the pick at 8-0 going into it. I mean, there's certainly potential to stumble. I mean, we've seen them lose in Starkville before. Oxford's not going to be easy. Columbia won't be easy, but I think 8-0 is pretty realistic looking into that. So I trust the defense overall. I don't think they're going to necessarily be top 5, top 10 unit nationally, but they're going to support that offense well. They're going to be one of the more balanced teams in the SEC, which I think is going to be their strength. But will they have the depth? And then, frankly, I touched a little bit about it earlier. It takes something special to knock off Bama and Georgia. I mean, consistently, especially, and doing it back-to-back years. It's a tall order, especially on the road. I put LSU at 9-3, 10-2 if they really have a clean season, lose that game to Bama, and I'll bet on them losing one other game they shouldn't, with some of those trap games on the road. So, but I mean, hey, 10 wins, even 9 wins really after the season they had last year with Brian Kelly. He's still really building up recruiting classes right now. I don't think any LSU fans are gonna, at least they shouldn't, really scoff at that if that happens.
Yeah, I think you have a pretty clear top 2 in each division. I think those two are both a little bit of a step behind the proven programs, though. Let's go to some dark horses that we think could crash that group. I'm going to go ahead and bunch 2 programs here together in the West. Which of these 2 do you think has a better chance of potentially unseating one of those championship caliber contender programs? I'm going to bunch together Ole Miss and Texas A&M. There are some similarities here. You have each has one really proven, really sturdy side of the ball. We know Lane Kiffin's offense is going to score. We know that Texas A&M defense is loaded and a top 7 unit nationally. We know that the other side of the ball for each of those programs isn't that great, and they each brought in an SEC familiar coordinator, Pete Golding for Ole Miss from Alabama, and Bobby Petrino back in the SEC to try to fix the A&M defense. We got 2 coaches that love to hear themselves talk. We've got talent acquisition is sturdy in both programs, right? NIL and the portal is killing it at Ole Miss, and NIL and high school recruiting is killing it at Texas A&M. So there are some similarities, even though they're kind of mirrored similarities. Which program do you think has a better shot at breaking through?
Parker, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if it's my maroon tinted glasses here. I think the obvious answer is Texas A&M. It's not maybe the most realistic answer, if those can be different, but I think on paper you have to go with A&M because eventually they've been like a statistical anomaly the last couple of seasons, right? It seems impossible to underachieve as much as they have since that Orange Bowl victory than what we've seen the Aggies do on the field. The talent is there. We thought the coordinators were there, and to be honest, Daryl Dickey took a bullet for Jimbo Fisher last year. Dickey was not the issue at Texas A&M. It was Jimbo Fisher and his TurboTax filings that were holding the A&M offense back, right? So Bobby Petrino, listen, that man carries all the baggage in the world and brings with him a ton of headlines. So for me, the big question with A&M is, can they, as a team, come together, rebuild some of the culture that I saw instituted when I covered the team, and truly believe them to be building towards a national title contender? All of that got washed away last year in that 5-7 campaign. You had the 5-star talents that were getting kicked off the team. Not just an A&M problem, as a couple of those guys have been dismissed from their second destinations as well, but it was not a good look for the Aggies. Still, that defense is so dang good, guys. And I feel like something has to change in the offense this year to where they will at least be average on the offensive side. And that's what A&M fans were saying all last year is, you give us an average offense, not a 110th offense or whatever they finished last season, and this team wins 8-9 games rather comfortably. Just score more than 17 points, and you are competing for a New Year's Six bowl game down the stretch. I think they can reach that level. I think they can get to the point where they're 9-3, threatening 10-2. And I don't think that's an egregious take. I don't know if Ole Miss has that same ceiling. So again, on paper, I think I have to lean the Aggies. Does that mean it proves to be true? Absolutely not. We'll just have to wait and see.
I think anomaly is an appropriate word, both for the past couple of years and this year, because it's going to be a roll of the dice what you get. But I like the point about scoring more than 17 points, because you look at the losses they had last year. The record obviously looked rough, but 17-14 to App State. You go on the road and you lose by 18 to Mississippi State. That's probably the one blip on the radar. 4 points to Bama, 6 points to Carolina, 3 points to Ole Miss, 17 to Florida, which is, again, a little bit out there, but then 3 points to Auburn. You turn some of those games around, and that's a 7-8 win season, as you were saying. And the script is completely flipped, and you're building to something greater this year. It could have easily been that way. I think, it comes down to a lot of the quarterback position. Obviously, you've got between Smith and Stewart out wide, you've got great skill position talent. The talent in general has never really been the concern. And I like, Mitch, your point about just coming together. This has seemed to be a team that is, especially in offense, just so dysfunctional and just not very connected as a unit, despite all the talents. And I don't know if that's, obviously I'm not in the building. I don't know if that's just a lot of different egos getting involved. I don't know if that's just too many offensive minds trying to put their stuff in there. Whatever the reason may be, it's make or break time now. There can't be any more excuses at this point. A&M fans are not going to accept another. I would set the bar at lower than 8 wins this year, and A&M fans are probably still very angry. At least I would be, I guess, in that scenario. But yeah, the schedule for A&M, obviously it's never easy, but you get Bama at home. There's plenty of opportunities for big wins. You can get a shot at Miami as well early in the season to hopefully build up some confidence entering conference play. So I like this A&M team. I agree. I think them over Ole Miss in that scenario. My concern with Ole Miss is just, in the trenches, are they going to be able to hang with some of the top dogs in the conference? I don't believe in that yet. I think the quarterback competition there, they've actually got, I think Spencer Sanders will fit what Kiffin wants to do really well. And I think Jackson Dart honestly showed some really nice things last year, along with Judkins. The offense is, again, not going to be concerned. It's just, in the trenches, in those, and I forget which one you said earlier, but do we trust Ole Miss to win tough games? I don't. A&M, I've seen them do it despite some poor showings. I've seen them win tough games. So I trust them in tight scenarios.
A&M can win a rock fight. I don't think Ole Miss can.
Exactly. So, I don't know. Ole Miss, and who knows, Kiffin might pull some magic as well of his own. And we'll see. Petrino's another big question mark, as we touched on. Just what is that offense going to look like this year? How much will it change? And how will that kind of affect the quarterback room? I guess also, Mitch, from your perspective, the quarterback situation, who do you see starting day one and being the guy?
It should be Wegman. It absolutely should. I covered him in high school, very similarly to how I covered Haynes King and thought King was the chosen one, and I was wrong about that. But
hey, there's
Connor
still
Wegman,
time in Georgia Tech. There's still plenty of time
That's
in Georgia
true.
Tech to
That's true.
revitalize that career.
Frank
I
Keys.
don't think he's going to win the job this year, but that is true. Listen, Wegman has a cannon of an arm. He's got a short, compact throwing motion, which is at least half of what King did not have last season, right? He's got a better offensive line in front of him. And there is zero excuse not to distribute the football to 6, 7, 8 guys on a routine basis. I mean, the offense is loaded. I'm excited to see the motion that we're reportedly hearing that Bobby Petrino is introducing. I mean, guys, the numbers are there. Like, truly, when A&M ran motion last year, first downs were easy to come by. When Jimbo said, nope, get into, your 2 wide set, it was tough to move the football. Shocker in 2022 then, and now obviously 2023. So I think it's just some basic tweaks, and A&M can be a whole lot better this year, but we'll see.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of consensus that we think A&M is better positioned to crash the party. I do think Ole Miss is going to have a really fun season. Love the skill talent there. That offense is going to be a blast. I think Lane Kiffin's going to get weird and play 2 quarterbacks at the same time. Some guys at FCS are doing that. I think I want to see Spencer Sanders and Jackson Dart sets. Let's do it.
He's got weird. 18 to choose from. He's got to.
Let's do it.
Their schedule is also just brutal too. I mean, that's the other reason I can't get behind Ole Miss, because I look at Bama and stuff, but I haven't looked at Tulane matchup. I think they can get tripped up early there. They're going to get tested a lot, which is I think it's gonna hurt them.
Yeah. I made these tiers and I added only one dark horse from the East, which might upset some fan bases, but that East dark horse for me, y'all might disagree. Tell me why I'm wrong. Is Kentucky. That defense made a huge leap last year into a top 10, kind of top 12 nationally defense, and they had been sturdy under Stoops for ages, but really took a big leap. A lot of those guys are back. Offense cratered last year with Rich Scangarello calling the plays. Will Levis injured all year, and the offensive line really fell apart. Haven't made a ton of moves to get that big blue wall back, but Liam Cohen back from the NFL to call plays. He led that great 2020 season or 2021 offense with Levis, Wan'Dale Robinson, etc. I love the wide receivers there. I think Kentucky's a dark horse. If Devin Leary, the quarterback from NC State, stays healthy, which has been a problem in the last 2 years, if he stays healthy all season, which, again, behind that line might not be a guarantee, I think Kentucky's going to make a little run to the top.
Parker, I'll kick kind of more of the breakdown to you, because I haven't fully decided what I think about Kentucky. Can I see them going, 9-3 maybe and upsetting Tennessee at home off a bye? Sure. If that offense is humming, why not? I don't think there would be a lot of defense that Tennessee is going to play this year, at least not as kind of their bread and butter. So yeah, if you get in an offensive shootout, that's how you're going to beat the Volunteers this year. It's really easy to get them to the break in week 8 at 6-1, right? Really, I think they're only tested. They host Florida, they go to Georgia, and then they host Missouri. You win 2 of 3 there, and I think if you're Big Blue Nation, you're feeling really good. The back half of that schedule is tough, right? Hosting Tennessee, they go at Mississippi State, which is never a fun place to play. Host Bama, at South Carolina, at Louisville. So I think it's much harder to finish the season on a high note, and that's why I'm not going to pick Kentucky to be like a true dark horse. But I think the ingredients are there, and Parker, I'm curious if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys summed up pretty well, especially Dan just saying, I mean, it comes down to Devin Leary staying healthy. I do think the marriage with him and Liam Cohen coming back to rejoin that program, it seems too perfect really on paper, and not saying too perfect in a bad way that it won't work out. It seems like there's no way it doesn't. Just, Leary kind of fits a lot of what Cohen would want to do within the system. The wide receivers, which you'll get into a little bit later, Dan, I think they've got a really underrated group. And then plucking Ray Davis from Vanderbilt, not the most heralded name, but Kentucky these past years, it seems like it's just plug in a running back and he runs for at least 800. So I think they're going to have another successful unit there. It depends a lot on that line. But yeah, the defense I think is going to be probably potentially the bigger question mark depending on how Cohen's offense goes. But yeah, it's the schedule obviously front loaded. You got that back loaded bit. It's just Kentucky's a program right now to where Stoops has recruited really well, built that program, way past anybody thought it could get to. A ton of credit has to go to him. Regardless, the margin for error, as I mentioned a couple times for some teams, it's very slim for Kentucky. The depth isn't there the same as it is with other teams. When you get late season into that really tough stretch, how healthy are they? How are they able to go week in and week out, hosting Tennessee in Starkville, hosting Bama, going to Columbia, going to Louisville? It's a tall order. I like them at ceiling 8 wins, if they can really put everything together and Cohen comes back and things work out. Leary stays healthy, of course. But yeah, I'm very interested to see Leary in his second stop. I think he showed great potential. He was really high NFL prospect before last season. I think he can rise back up to that. And who knows? I mean, we got Kentucky having, two highly, even though Levis dropped out of the first round 2 years in a row, having a highly touted NFL quarterback. That'd be some for Stoops to hang his hat on too. So a very interesting case. I think one of the more just wild cards of the conference this year that nobody's really talking about all too much. So yeah, and another thing I want to shout out about Kentucky's schedule. It seems like year in and year out, the month of September, they decide to take off and they just play MAC schools and, some Kentucky school. And I get that you have the rivalry game with Louisville, but Georgia and Florida also have that rivalry game at the end of the season and they'll schedule other opponents. I think Kentucky, to start to gain some national respect too, needs to bolster that schedule a little bit. And I think they will in the future as well. So but yeah, they'll be an interesting case, but I see them probably just behind, we'll go into them a little bit later, just behind Carolina in the East, probably in that 4th or 5th spot.
Okay, so there's our disagreement. So I put South Carolina in my next tier, which is we're feeling good tier. I don't personally believe these are true dark horses, but the fan base, they're feeling good. And that's South Carolina and that's Auburn. South Carolina couldn't be riding higher. You take the last 2 games of the year and you forget everything that came before it because those 2 weeks were magical. And I don't know. I watched that team get steamrolled by Missouri, get steamrolled by Florida. I know there's a coordinator change with Dow Loggins coming in and, Marcus Satterfield out. But this is a bad offensive line. This is not a good defensive line either. Secondary is going to be really good. Spencer Rattler, I think, is a pretty good quarterback, but we've also seen him be a not very good quarterback. The high school recruiting is incredible, right? And I think Beamer's building something for 2024, 2025. I'm not sold on 2023 South Carolina. Parker, you seem to be buying in. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I think for me, it is a tale of their season was told in 2 parts. I think the upside of this Carolina team is incredibly high. I think their ceiling is, realistically with that schedule, that ceiling is 10 wins because I can't put them at 11 because that's just too difficult to say that they beat one of Clemson or Georgia automatically. But I think the ceiling is a realistic 10 wins if everything comes together how it should. Rattler, and this is all, of course, the whole storyline of the offseason. Will they continue on how they ended the season against Tennessee and Clemson? That's remained to be seen. Will Rattler stay at that level? You would assume so with more experience in a full offseason, getting used to the coordinator. You hope so. I do have concern about the lines. The skill position talent's still definitely there. You mentioned the secondaries there. This schedule is brutal. There's no front load, there's no back load. It just spread out. That North Carolina opener, that week 1 game, I think we're going to learn a lot about this team. And I think people are either going to write them off or really treat them as a main contender after that one. You've obviously got Georgia in the season, that annual game they always played mid-September. I'd be interested to see if Beamer and Kirby like and want that to continue playing so early on between 2 of the contenders in the East, or if they might want to change up the scheduling of that later on. But you're in Knoxville, you're in Columbia, you're at Texas A&M. It's not going to be easy. I am higher on this team, I think, than most, just because I think Rattler is going to continue on what he was doing. I think Antron Wells is going to be a name that people are going to start hearing a lot. And I think you would expect at least improvement up front to where they can hold serve against most SEC teams. They're still going to lose to Georgia. I would imagine Clemson's going to walk into Columbia and be pissed off at the world, and they're going to really want to get some revenge for last season. So I'm going to go ahead and peg those as 2 losses, and it's realistic they drop at least a third to at Tennessee, someone along those lines. But I think outside of that, they can run the table fairly easily, depending on a lot of things working out kind of in their favor. But I'll be a Rattler believer for a bit. we'll see how it goes. I've been a Rattler believer multiple other times in his career, and sometimes it's worked out, sometimes it hasn't. So we shall see.
Parker, you are bought in on Coach Skits and Bits over here. We're gonna TikTok our way to the top of the SEC East.
Well, hey, listen, exactly. I've kind of compared Spencer Rattler to like one of those crypto tokens, right? Not like Bitcoin or Ethereum, but like the ones that can like rise and crash really quickly, right? You have like minute millionaires. Because when Spencer Rattler's on, he's tough to beat. Like you see that twinkle in his eye, he's throwing off platform, he's making magic happen. The problem is, and Dan, I'm on your side as well. I'm not a believer in South Carolina this year. The problem is you're asking him to do that every dang play with as bad as this offensive line could be. And conversely, I have no idea how they're getting to the quarterback on defense. They lost all of their pass rush production, or at least perceived production. And so it's not that it can't be there. They're just going to have a whole new cast of characters step up. You mentioned the secondary should be really good. That's something that is kind of becoming synonymous with the Gamecocks, is their secondary plays really well. But that alone is not going to get you through this schedule. So Parker, you're obviously higher on them. My question to you is, like, their road schedule is tough, right? Especially right through the middle of that schedule. I think they're going to beat North Carolina. I'm not that high on North Carolina, although if they can't get to Drake May, he might throw for 600 yards on them. But, we'll see. My question is, going to a Tennessee, going to even a Missouri and Texas A&M, which are back-to-back, if you're struggling in the trenches, what is the path to victory on the road against Tennessee, on the road against Texas A&M, if they can't stop the run, if they can't get to the quarterback?
Frankly, and it's not the best strategy whatsoever, but at that point it is win shootouts.
Yeah.
You go into Knoxville and you be prepared to score at least 40, and you give. I think it's the type of season where you live and die with what Spencer Rattler does. You give him the reins and you say, at certain points, we need you to win this football game for us. We're going to let you, and we're going to kind of live with your mistakes and your triumphs. So it's not a foolproof solution by any means. I think the Tennessee game obviously is going to be a very tough draw. Tennessee is going to be looking for revenge. I think another point kind of against Carolina that I heard a little bit last season from just some family friends that are kind of in the athletic department or involved in the athletic department. Just there was rumors that there was some a little bit of quote unquote beef or whatever you want to say between the defense and offense entering that Carolina game, between some defensive players and a couple of the offensive players. So a lot of people pointed that as the reason they lit up Tennessee in that game. Still doesn't explain what happened to Clemson though. But I think the schedule set up weird. You end the season with 4 straight home games too. So if you enter that final stretch, with a respectable, even just 2 losses by that point, I think you're riding high. But it's going to be tough. I think it's going to take a lot of, and I would assume Beamer knows that the trenches are going to be the biggest concern, and that's what he's going to have to prepare for this season and have to kind of, move some things around, kind of adjust for it. And it might harm them in some ways, but I think that duo, I think Rattler to Wells is going to be unstoppable throughout this season. I think they need to be better balanced this year, which is, I think, going to be a big focus for them this offseason. If they can do that, I think the offense is going to have no troubles. But yeah, that road slate is just brutal. I think they'll get humbled against Georgia early, like they did last year. And I honestly think that will be very, very good for them, because then they can come back, take care of Mississippi State, enter Tennessee with a bit more confidence. We'll see. I think, very similar position to Kentucky, a wild card team that could go as high as 9 wins, maybe even 10, as low as 5 to 6, really.
Yeah, to me, that fan base's optimism right now is unbridled. A lot of that is due to those 2 incredible, historic wins. I think a discerning South Carolina fan should feel a lot better about 2025 than 2023. In my opinion, that's my view. But another team that is also feeling just really great right now, they got their guy, and that's Auburn. Hugh Freeze back to save the day, beat Alabama once every 3 years, I guess will make you happy there. Is Hugh Freeze going to build a title contender? Does he have an SEC contender right off the bat? Peyton Thorne, is that the answer at quarterback? There's been a lot of defensive talent that's come through that building, but they did lose a lot from last year's defense. I like a lot of the offensive transfers they brought in. brought in a bunch of guys up front. Unlike South Carolina, they went and improved those trenches in the portal. Brian Beatty, running back from South Florida, I think is going to be a star in the league this year. I really like their wide receiver hire, Davis from Georgia Southern, former Auburn receiver himself. He led one of the best wide receiver rooms, maybe the best wide receiver room in the group of five, made that really good Georgia Southern offense click. You know, I was going to sneak some Sun Belt into the SEC preview, of course. So Auburn, are we buying in? Hugh Freeze, is he the answer?
Yeah, I'll keep mine short. I think he certainly could be. Listen, it doesn't. Gene Chizik won at Auburn, right? It doesn't necessarily take this mastermind of a coach to win at Auburn. The talent is great. The recruiting bloodlines are there. And like you said, it's kind of you inexplicably catch lightning in a bottle and beat Alabama once every 3 years or so. So for me, do they have a good quarterback? That's what they've lacked over the last several years. Yes, they do. Peyton Thorne. We think the defense should be good. I mean, again, they're going to have to replace a lot of production, but Auburn typically plays pretty solid defense. The glaring issue was that they had one of the worst offensive lines statistically in the country last season. That has been improved. Now it's patchwork. It's a lot of transfers, and just assuming that talented pieces coming in immediately improves an offensive line isn't necessarily airtight logic, but that line has got to be better than what it was last year. For me, that automatically raises Auburn's ceiling, you know, by a game or two. I think a 7-8 win Auburn team might be optimistic, but the path is there. And I could see Hugh Freeze kind of lighting a fire on the plains and whipping up War Eagle into a frenzy this season.
Yeah, I'll try to keep mine short as well. I'm droning on a bit too much about all these teams, but yeah, I think Auburn. I mainly agree. I think anything above 6 wins, and you're saying Hugh Freeze is our savior. He's coming in. He's got this on the right track. I think you're shooting for a bowl game this season from Auburn. Touched on quarterback, offensive line. That's obviously the big ones. I think their defense is really going to hold serve and be solid in the conference this year. The one thing I look at, you know, even honestly with Auburn, at least in this type of scenario, when they're not contending for an SEC title, I look at it, is it the year where, because they alternate every year, do they play both Georgia and Bama away from home, or do they play them both at home? Hugh Freeze lucked out and got his magical first season where he gets them both at home. You steal one of those games, you could win 4 games on the season and you're completely fine. And that's probably considered, you know, the fans are still with you after that. So I think that's going to be the big key for him. Can he win one that he shouldn't? And then hold serve in all those other games. You know, I think that at Cal game week 2 is just going to be really weird, late night Pac-12 after dark. Obviously should win that game. But Cal might, you know, make it a low scoring, grind it out kind of game, especially with the Auburn offense still finding its feet. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Freeze comes with. I think he's accepted kind of the baggage he has and the reputation he has coming in. He knows that he's got to work past that and kind of, you know, earn a lot of people's trust back in some of those regards. So we'll see how he does. Great offensive mind. I think he's going to do wonders with the talent at Auburn, and I think he's going to put them on the right track. You're shooting for bowl game this year, and then you're working from there.
Yeah, that Cal game, one of the more stark culture clashes I can imagine between two fan bases, but they have a really easy non-con. It'll be interesting to see, you know, because Freeze brought in Philip Montgomery, who had been head coach at Tulsa the last couple of years, really accomplished offensive coordinator. So he's going to be running the offense there. It's not going to be Hugh Freeze calling the plays. Is there a little mini, you know, Jimbo Petrino situation there? We all kind of expect that to unfold in an interesting way. We'll see. Does Hugh Freeze get frustrated with Phil Montgomery? Does he set the world on fire? With the next tier is 4 teams that I think really need good vibes this year. I wouldn't say these are hot seat situations, certainly not in Fayetteville, but maybe a little toasty. And that's Billy Napier's Florida program, Drinkwitz and Mizzou, Sam Pittman's Arkansas program, and not a hot seat, but with Zach Arnett and Mississippi State. I think these programs they just need a good year. They really need it. They could use it. And, you know, Missouri 2 years ago had one of the worst defenses in the entire Power 5. Drinkwitz goes out, hires Blake Baker, gets a bunch of solid transfers, remakes that defense in 1 year. Well, last year the offensive side of the ball cratered. Does the same thing. Go gets a new offensive coordinator. Go gets a bunch of transfers. Does he have that quick fix on that side of the ball? Arkansas lost a ton of talent, brought in a ton as well from all over the map. They brought in Power 5 transfers. They brought in Division II transfers, FCS. Which of these two teams, fake rivalry, real rivalry, I don't know. Which team is hitting the portal better? Which one is kind of getting back into that maybe 8-4 range from being in that 6-6 territory?
I think I think that's a great way to frame it. Which team has the better shot at 8-4? To me, it's Arkansas, but not by much. Arkansas, and listen, it's kind of, it depends on your viewpoint. If you believe that a team can just stack from the transfer portal and that, leads to more success, hey, that's totally fair. I'm maybe not one of those guys. And so for me, I'm not the biggest believer in KJ Jefferson. I love Rocket Sanders, but I'm not sold that Arkansas is going to be able, especially with their schedule. I think they can get to a ho-hum 7-5. But given the talent around them in the West, I have a hard time saying they need to be favored over a lot of their in-conference opponents. For Missouri, I want to believe in the Tigers. I really do. I see that the stock is up. Drinkowitz is a fun personality. I don't know that I would love him if he was my coach necessarily, but then again, I deal with Jimbo Fisher. So, who really knows? But I want to believe in the Tigers. I think they're moving in the right direction. Again, it's very similar to Arkansas. It's like, man, you just play in the wrong league for me to get you consistently to 8-4 right now. Now that offense could be so much fun. Like most of these teams, it's like, all right, can the defense win you a game it shouldn't, right? Can the defense win you a game at Kentucky? Can they knock off South Carolina at home? How plucky are you against Tennessee, Florida, and Arkansas to finish that schedule? For me, Missouri could be an 8-4 team with a magical season. But I think more than likely they're probably around the 6-6 going to a bowl game range. So I think that's a great way to frame it, Dan. I'll say Arkansas.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. I think I'm more high on Arkansas than I am on Auburn. I would definitely say. I think another point, kind of not necessarily against Arkansas, but in a way, kind of, is that last year they had so many injury struggles with Jefferson and Sanders, not being in the field at the same time, sometimes both of them being out. Can they stay healthy for a full season with the workload that's going to be expected of them? I think a big debate probably for Sam Pittman this offseason has been, do I run KJ as much as we have in the past, knowing that you risk that injury, but also knowing that you need him to do that to beat some of the top teams in the SEC? I think that's going to be a real big dilemma for him. That's why he's being paid the money he is. Him and his staff are going to have to work that one out. Arkansas, I think high upside. I worry about the defensive losses. With that, Missouri, as a current student there, I could go on for an hour about kind of the state of the program.
I'll join you. We can do that.
I was about to say, Dan and I could have a whole podcast to ourselves, but yeah, I think it is, the trajectory is up. I certainly agree. It comes down to, I think the defense should be, I'll go on a limb and say elite, depending on how the defensive end room comes together. Darius Robinson sliding over, how effective is he? Outside of that, there's not really a starting position you look at and say that's a whole. Defensive tackle room is great. Linebackers are deep. Secondary is experience, bringing everybody back. You got multiple NFL caliber guys. Special teams is looking great. Skill positions are looking great. I think I'm a personal Cody Schrader believer. I think he's going to have a phenomenal season. What two positions does that leave? Offensive line, which, as we were talking about with some other teams, they tried to patchwork it with transfer portal. How is that going to work? It's been a struggle there for a couple years now, the offensive line. Brady Cook, since week 2 of last season, played with a torn labrum, still had a good, the definition of good, not great season, to where a couple games he won. That Arkansas game, he really won for Missouri in a lot of ways, but then there's a couple games he most certainly lost for Missouri. What is he going to be like? How much pressure is he going to feel throughout the season, knowing that Jake Garcia, Sam Horn are kind of standing behind him, waiting for their opportunity? Drinkowitz is going to wait to name a starter till later in fall camp this time around, probably play a couple guys early on too. It'll be interesting for Missouri. There's a lot of pressure on the program right now to exceed that 6-win mark. I have them, it's an optimistic 7 wins, but it's going to take them winning more swing games than they have these past couple seasons. And that's a major if, because as we've learned last year, they find any way to lose a game. Look at the Auburn game, look at the Kentucky game. A rule change just happened because of one of their losses last year. So it's interesting. And then, touching on Florida, Mississippi State, I think the Napier situation is difficult just because of year two. You lost a lot from that roster last year. Obviously, Anthony Richardson tried to patch things with transfer portal, but this needs to be more of a long-term rebuild. And that fan base is among the most impatient in the SEC. They're not used to barely qualifying for bowl games and getting ran by Oregon State. If this season, if he doesn't make a bowl game, how hot is that seat? Is that enough to get him fired in year two? Which sounds crazy for a guy they just brought in, but it's the SEC, and I feel like we've seen this story before where it's a perfect storm that goes against the coach, and maybe he's on his way out. Personally, I hope not. I think he has a lot of potential to build that program, but I don't know.
I don't think Billy Napier is going to get fired after this year, because I don't think the AD Jeremy Foley is going to get fired. And how many guys is he going to keep getting to hire? So you know what I mean? Like how many football coaches are you going to let him have? And so I think he'll give Napier at least another year. I don't know why it had to be such a down to the studs rebuild. Like we see Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly and Deion Sanders and Hugh Freeze and GJ Kinney. I mean, all levels of the sport going out and rebuilding a roster in a year. Why did it have to be a down to the studs, multiple year 6-6 rebuild? It didn't have to be that way, in my opinion. But I don't know. I'm worried about Florida. I do think that Florida's going to have a bad year. I don't trust Graham Mertz. I don't trust that offense. And I do think that Napier will be pressured to hire an offensive coordinator next season, much like Eli Drinkwitz and Shane Beamer and Jimbo Fisher and others have had to make.
Just off the top of your head, if I set the over under for wins that they get in the next 2 seasons, not this season, but 2 seasons at 8.5, they go over or under that? Because next year's schedule, I mean, it's truly, this year's schedule is tough. And then you look at next year's schedule and it's like, oh my gosh, you're talking about probably a new quarterback, a freshman quarterback, maybe in DJ Lagway. Guys, I don't know how I could be any more stocked down on the on-field performance for Florida. I think the recruiting could stay really good, but if you're a Gators fan, I mean, it is going to be a tough next 2 years. And I wonder where does Napier, survive in all of that? We'll get to it a little bit later with hot takes. I agree. I think the Gators are going to have a terrible year, but I think Napier is going to keep his job mostly just out of kind of necessity.
I think they're going to look a little like your Texas A&M Aggies last year. Really, really rough and tumble on offense, but a really good defense. There's a lot of pieces there, and I really like their new coordinator, Austin Armstrong from Southern Miss. So
this is the wrong standard to set, unfortunately, for my team last year.
I think it'll resemble it. I don't think anybody's going to be happy with that, because I think that fan base likes scoring. They like Steve Spurrier ball. They like Urban Meyer ball. They're running it back with Will Muschamp Part 2 so far. I don't think they love that.
Yeah. I was doing the same thing as you, Mitch. So I didn't even look at 24, but the 2023 schedule. It's just, I struggled to even pick out 5 wins. I can't even give you 6. I mean, that's just, unless you walk into Salt Lake and just change the perspective immediately with the dominant performance, but it's going to be. You take an SEC really schedule brutal.
And then tack on 2 more 10 top 12 teams. That's
Florida State games.
Mississippi State. State is moving on after the tragic passing of the Pirate of Mike Leach, going away from his true uncut air raid. Barbe coming in from App State, Central Michigan. He's put together a lot of really good G5 offenses. So they're going to run the ball more. I really like Tula Griffin on offense. I think there's some interesting pieces. Will Rogers is, captain check down. He's going to dink and dunk. And defense should be sturdy again under the leadership of Zach Arnett. What kind of year does it take for Mississippi State to feel good about Arnett's program? It's just such a total schematic change that it's really hard to say.
I think it's multiple conference wins, and I know that sounds bleak and a far cry from what Mississippi State has done the last several years. Listen, even if they don't have the most talent, they find a way to go 8-4, 7-5. They've ruined A&M's season multiple times, that I got to watch that firsthand. So this is a team that always punches above their weight, but given what we have watched play out, right, with the passing of the Pirate and the handing of the torch, and now a whole overhaul on offense, I just don't. It's hard to buy stock in Mississippi State this year. So for me, I look at this schedule and if they lose to Arizona, which is very possible, I know it's a home game, but that Arizona team is stock up right now. I think 5-7, 4-8 could be what you see, right? Like there has to be a team, at least one team in the SEC West that kind of gets beat up on, right? And we've kind of espoused the perks and the upside of the other teams in the West. Mississippi State's that one team that I'm like, I don't really know kind of where to hang my hat on here. So I think it could be a rough year for the Bulldogs. I love the program. I think it's going to take time for Arnett to build there.
Yeah, I think your point about in the West, if you look at it year by year, there is always at least one, usually two teams that are just beat to a pulp, essentially at the bottom of the standings. I think last year was Auburn and A&M for the most part. I think this year you look at Mississippi State certainly in that mix, just because in that division, it's just how many teams do you look at in the West, and you're saying Mississippi State on paper and on the field could beat them. That's a tough call. I think them along with Auburn are probably going to be in that cellar, kind of fighting for one of them getting to a bowl game, the other more than likely not. I think with Rodgers back, I mean, hey, who knows? That's a guy who's seen a lot of football, pulled off a lot of upsets in his time. I don't count them out with him, and I think the defense is going to be solid as well. There's nothing, like you said, with these other teams. There's some kind of glaring positive. With Mississippi State, there's nothing you look at that makes you really want to get behind them, which makes it difficult. And I mean, the schedule's never easy for an SEC West team. Mississippi State's pretty consistently those preseason top 10 toughest schedule rankings you see. Mississippi State usually crops up around then. It's never easy for them, and I do not think this year is going to be any different.
Yeah, I like that point. I like some things, but there's not one thing that like I'm in love with. The way I think Florida's gonna have a really good front seven, or so Missouri's gonna have a really great secondary. Arkansas has KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sand, like all these little things that you're like, I feel great about that. There's not anything on Mississippi State that I'm like, I feel great about that. And then our last tier to wrap it up is the Vanderbilt tier. In the Vanderbilt tier, we have Vanderbilt. Getting to 4 or 5 wins again would be another achievement. Stealing a couple conference wins would be another achievement. I think they have some chance for a couple really fun home wins with that Hawaii game. I think the Wake Forest game is in Nashville again this year. If somebody could fact check me on that real fast.
It's a road game.
Oh, it is. Okay, my mistake then. But I think that I don't know. Like Clark Lee is a good coach. He's building something. What does that mean at a program like Vanderbilt in the SEC and in the soon to be enlarged SEC? We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a ton to add with Vandy. It's just they do what they can, and I think 4 wins would honestly be a decent season for them. If they can find a way to win a conference game this year, that would be great. They host Kentucky and Missouri. Maybe you say that's picking off one of those two might be their best way to do it. They go to Florida. The second half of the schedule is not fun. Obviously, they have that second bye because of the week 0 game. So it's 3 games and then a bye week before Tennessee. But guys, I don't think they're going to beat Tennessee even with extra preparation. So I think 4-8 is kind of the ceiling for the Doors this year.
Yeah, it is the AJ Swan show. I really like Will Shepherd, a wide receiver, but trying to pick off 1 or 2.
You stole my thunder, Dan. I was about to go on this massive rant about AJ Swan and Shepherd and how much I love both of them and think they're going to be a great duo. I do. I think AJ Swan is up and coming quarterback. I think Shepherd's a wide receiver name not being talked about. Really good, big body target. I'll refrain from ranting about it, but I do. I took some partial into saying a Vanderbilt tier because while yes, they do belong at the bottom tier, I think Vanderbilt as a program is feeling better than they have in probably 5 to 6 years. Just the coach that you have in place, and they are clearly building something, and they showed last year with being Kentucky and Florida that they are capable of pulling off some wins. They're not going to take anybody by surprise this year like they did last year, which I think is going to hurt them. But I like the direction Vanderbilt's heading. They are certainly still going to be the worst team in the SEC, and they are certainly going to be around that 4, best case scenario 5 win mark. And I think they'll be fine with that for another season. Shoot for a bowl game, 24, probably 25 more realistically.
Oh,
That's
you're muted.
my fault. That's the tiering of the conference as we see it, or as I see it, and you all played along. Let's move on to kind of lightning round. Let's hit some sleepers, some guys to watch, all those kind of things. Let's start first with our top conference games that we each see for the season. For me, I'm going to start with LSU and Alabama. I mean, this game has been a showcase every year since Saban came back to the league. And, those emotions run high every time that old fan base gets a crack. And, of course, now you throw in the revenge from last season. LSU and Alabama, you can't beat it. I mean, that's the top of the sport every year, the pinnacle. Even if it's a 9-6 game, it's the best 9-6 game you've ever seen in your life. These two have gotten together and played some stone classics. I think we're looking at another entry in the canon as a classic this year down in Tuscaloosa.
I agree. Transparently, had I been able to fill mine in, not last, I probably would have picked LSU at Alabama or Georgia at Tennessee. But I was running a little late today. So Texas A&M at Alabama Alabama at Texas A&M is my submission. I mean, magic happened 2 years ago. A&M nearly got them last year. If Alabama doesn't have a quarterback, I'd really wonder how many points the Crimson Tide score against that Aggie defense under the lights, more than likely in Kyle Field. That should be a fun game.
Yeah, and for me, I circled the other one with that, Georgia at Tennessee. Late season game this time around. Tennessee is going to be coming off a tough game at Missouri. Georgia's schedule is going to be fairly light, even though they'll be coming off hosting Ole Miss. I talked a lot about that chess match between Kirby and Heupel. We're going to see round 2 of that, or technically round 3, but on a major stage, round 2 this year. So SECs will probably come down to it. Neyland Stadium will yet again be electric, probably be one of the best environments this season. Plenty to look forward to there. Shifting gear though to non-conference games, SEC's got a couple of really big ones this year. I'll start us off. I think biggest one, probably second biggest one, you could argue. But Texas making the return trip to Tuscaloosa. Ultra talented Texas team. I'm a big Quinn Ewers believer, honestly, and I think he's going to have a spectacular season. Marching into Tuscaloosa is a different animal, especially in week 2. Saban consistently every year prepares his teams better early in the season, and I mean off season leading into early season, than any other program in the country. Going to be a tough order. Tons of talent on that field, though. Will be a lot of fun to watch. Tuscaloosa is going to be rocking as well. I think that's just going to be a fun preview to when Texas enters the league next year.
I'm going with Florida at Utah. I am mad that I didn't get Texas, Alabama. I am buying in on Texas. I hate myself already for buying in, but I am. But the Gators, they very rarely venture outside of the swampy confines of their home state for the non-conference. But they're heading up to the decidedly unfriendly confines of Rice-Eccles Stadium. Utah's basically undefeated there the last couple of years. And for the Utes, I think that loss in Gainesville last year when Anthony Richardson really established himself, I think that game left a sour taste in their mouth all year, all off season. Just a absolute coulda, woulda, shoulda game of all time. And I don't trust Billy Napier's offense with Graham Mertz, like I said earlier, but I do really like their defense with Arson Armstrong. I think that's going to be a salty defense. But the thing about Utah is they play their best ball in November. They're not always fully put together in September, and Cam Rising tore his ACL in that Rose Bowl against Penn State. So I don't know how good that Utah team is going to look right out of the gate. So maybe a not that great Florida team goes up there and gets another classic. The SEC is the best win, even if maybe that might not be the result that we would have seen in November. So I think that's an interesting.
I'll make it 3 for 3 on folks buying into Texas this year. It just feels different. I know at the end of this year, when they go 8-4, we're all going to say we knew this was coming. But that's a really talented Texas team. I think they're going to give Alabama a run for their money again. I'll go LSU at Florida State. This game's in Orlando. Is that right?
Correct.
Kind of a neutral site, but a pseudo home game for LSU. So they're scratching Florida State's back this season. I said on our ACC preview, I'm very high on Florida State. I've made the joke that I invested in Knowles coin a long time ago and am just, a Knowles coin millionaire right now. That being said, the non-round ball took a funny bounce against LSU last year. I think the pendulum swings the other way. I feel like LSU finds a way to win this game, even though I'm really excited about the Noles this year. But that game I don't think it necessarily has huge playoff implications because it's week 1 and we've seen teams rebuild and as long as they go undefeated after that, they have a really good chance at getting in. So certainly you can't make a mistake if you lose this game, but boy, this is going to be must-see TV. I can't wait to watch these teams, both explosive offenses, both defenses have bona fide superstars on them. This will be a game that I think we remember for a while.
Yeah, I mean, great points on LSU FSU, but I have to say the resident Aggie fan saying he's a Texas believer. I'm very intrigued by that. I'll go ahead.
I'll go ahead. I call it down the middle, man. I have a diploma from one of those schools, but game recognizes game, and Texas has that game this year.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
They're built in the trenches and on defense.
How about this? I'll give you the chance then to hype up your Aggies. Offensive players to watch this season. You've got the quarterback down there. Sell us on Mr. Weigman.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of did earlier, right? He's got the complete package. He can run, he can throw. This is a kid that committed to play baseball at A&M as well as football. Is not playing baseball, shocker, once he got on campus, but at least he said he was going to. I know some people may write this off as a homer pick, and hey, I totally understand. But Weigman has the potential, truly has the potential to be a quarterback that brings a conference championship to A&M for the first time in, since 1998, right? And the first in the SEC. His decision-making is really good. Did not throw an interception last year as a true freshman in limited action, but still did not make that against some talented secondaries. And he's got a host of weapons around him that are not only going to be able to secure the football, but then, create yards after the catch. And for that reason, I think Weigman's going to have a really special year at A&M. First year under Bobby Petrino. The motion's going to be huge, and I think Weigman will fit in that system.
Yeah.
I cheated here.
I
cheated here and took 2 players. I'm going to take Dane Key and Barian Brown, Kentucky's young wide receiver core. I think that they're going to thrive with Devin Leary and Liam Cohen. They both put up over 500 yards last year as true freshmen. I think, and that was with the hobbled Will Levis and with a much less effective playbook. So another year of development for this pairing, a better offensive infrastructure. I think that they're both in for huge seasons. This could be the best wide receiver tandem, not in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, and I think for my guy, I touched on him a lot already, but Brew McCoy at Tennessee sliding into that wide receiver number 1 role. If you remember back in the day, he had the recruiting. I mean, one of the strangest recruitments you ever see with, is he going to go to Texas? Is he at USC? Is he back at Texas, back at USC? Now he's at Tennessee, and he seemed to find a place that he fits there. Great athlete, had a lot of clutch catches last season, especially in that Bama game. I think he'll be a high-quality number 1, put up some great numbers in the Heupel offense. But switching over to the other side of the ball, defensive players to watch. Mitch, you talked a little bit about Mason Smith early on. Kind of what are you seeing from him, and how is he going to impact LSU's defense?
He's an explosive presence along the defensive line. I think when most people expect you to name a defensive star for LSU, they expect Harold Perkins, and nothing against Harold Perkins, but everyone's talked about him, right? That story has been told. Mason Smith got to play 2 series last year. He tore his ACL, celebrating a sack essentially against Florida State in the opener. That was a massive loss to this LSU defense. A explosive interior guy who can get to the passer as well as stop the run. LSU has some transfers coming back, but that front 7 has a chance, depending on how they use Harold Perkins, and maybe they play him a little bit more at linebacker this year. Even Brian Kelly said, no, he wasn't a linebacker. He was a pass rusher last year. I'm curious to see how they deploy their forces this year, but Mason Smith's going to be in the middle of it.
I'm also going to stick in there in the trenches. I'm going to take Jaheim Otis at Alabama. This guy is a massive prospect, massive body, just one of those classic interior freaks of nature, like an Ashawn Robinson, a Quinnen Williams, a Jonathan Allen, that those guys were lining up for Alabama for a decade, but the last couple of years they've been in Athens, not in Tuscaloosa. So looks like Nick Saban has a war daddy again in Jaheim Otis. I think that's going to be a difference maker for that defense.
Yeah, and then look at us giving some respect to the defensive lineman in the trenches. I'll keep it on the same front. I got Michael Williams out of Georgia, kind of a guy that came on late in the season as a freshman. In a Georgia defense that is always loaded and very tough to find time on the playing field as a true freshman. But 4.5 sacks last year, 2 of which came in the playoff. People are loving him as the next great, total defensive lineman, I think, overall. And they're already hyping him up as a future, top 10, top even 5 draft pick. I think he's going to really take that next step this season now with a full off season as kind of one of the guys up front. So I think it'll be really exciting year for him.
Transfer portal CFB magazine cover athlete Michael Williams.
Exactly. Got to give him a shout out. But yeah, so now kind of moving on, some of the under the radar guys that, even the diehard SEC fans might not really know about at this juncture. Mitch, who do you got?
Yeah, guys, let's go to Columbia, South Carolina. I'm not super high on the Gamecocks, as I said, but one of the issues that they have to address is how on earth are they going to get to the passer, and Grayson Howard, explosive freshman linebacker, might be part of that solution. He's good in the run defense as a stand-up linebacker, but he can also rush off the edge. I'm really curious to see how Beamer draws up his defense, how they scheme to knock an SEC offense out of rhythm. And, listen, I don't know exactly what kind of role Howard's going to carve out, but he will play. And I think one of his biggest strengths will be getting to the passer for the Gamecocks.
I'll also stay in Columbia, but in Columbia, Missouri. I'm going to go with Dalen Carnell. Last year as a redshirt freshman, he played about half the snaps opposite Martez Manuel at that star, nickel position. Manuel was a much better pass rusher and box player. Carnell thrived in coverage. He led the team in takeaways. He was an absolute ball hawk. Now he's going to get a larger share of those reps. We'll see how Blake Baker deploys him in terms of, early downs. Is he, sturdy enough to play in the box the way Manuel did? We'll see. But I think he's going to stuff the stat sheet with his ball hawk skills. I think he's in for a huge breakout year. Missouri has 9 defensive starters returning. It's 8. It's 8 defensive returning starters. It's kind of 9 if you consider, Carnell's 450 snaps that he played years. So 8.5 maybe. I think that's going to be really good defense. I think Carnell's going to be one of the ball hawk stars of that defense.
Yeah, and I think my guy, I talked a little bit about him already, but Will Shepherd out of Vanderbilt, I think just it's tough to be a Vanderbilt player and get a ton of preseason recognition, especially, but 6'3", 200 pounds, had 776 yards, 9 touchdowns last season. AJ Swan's favorite target by far. I think those two are continuing to develop together. I think Shepherd's going to put up some great numbers. He's just a tough cover, good hands, great routes. He doesn't necessarily do anything spectacularly, but he does everything pretty well, and he's tough cover in jump ball scenarios as well. So I think he and Swan are both going to take big steps forward this year and have some pretty solid years. Now moving on to probably what I was looking forward to the most out of this whole thing, and that is each of our hot takes. So we'll run it down with 3 each. Mitch, we will start with yours. What's going to happen this year in the SEC that nobody expects?
So we can actually roll through mine because I've talked about 2 of them already. One, I'm not high on South Carolina, so I think they take a step back, contrary to what TikTok would have you believe. I think Florida misses a bowl game. They underachieve on the field, but they keep Billy Napier. Florida fans are really active on the website formerly known as twitter.com. And they keep saying that Florida is going to surprise everybody, and they might. I don't see that in the cards, but I think on the other hand, when they underperform this year, you could see the fan base really turn on Billy Napier. But I think, Dan, like you said, the administration sticks with him. He might be a dead man walking with the 2024 schedule, but I just don't see them jettisoning Billy after this year. Finally, and this may be one of the hotter takes that we have tonight, I think Texas A&M can upset LSU in the season finale. I don't think they would necessarily ruin LSU's playoff chances, but I do think that would be a really fun game to see A&M finally break serve, right? Like we haven't seen a team win on the road in that series in a couple of years now, but A&M could have the ingredients to do it. When you talk about on the road, hostile environment, night game, you need an elite defense to do it. You combine that with what should be, and I'm speaking it into existence, better offense, and the ingredients are there to do it. I think Texas A&M has a chance to knock off the Bayou Bengals in the finale.
I love it. Here are my long shots. Don't make me explain them. Just my hot takes, my long shots. 1, South Carolina finishes last in the East. 2, Auburn beats Alabama. 3, Isaac Ukwu, defensive end, Ole Miss, first or second team All SEC.
Well, sounds good. Seems like one thing I definitely learned through this is that I am higher on South Carolina than most people are, and maybe I need to start rethinking. But yeah, for mine, I've got first. I think Tennessee beats Georgia in Knoxville. I'm not 100% guaranteeing that, but I am saying that is going to be something I'll ride with. But they still lose the SECs. They drop 2 other games. I'm looking at Alabama as obviously one of them, but I touched on how tough it is for them to win in Gainesville. You got to play at Missouri, at Kentucky. I think they drop another one, and Georgia still ends up representing the East in the championship game. Jalen Milroe at Alabama, I think while he may not do it through the air all the time, I think he's going to become a star and someone that they learn to be able to lean on just as with his dual threat ability. And I think he really comes into his own this season. And I'll go on a limb, and I'll Spencer Sanders is a guy that I've tried to believe in for so long, and I was a big fan of his at Oklahoma State, and they kind of petered off at the end. I'll give him one last run. I think he wins the job in Oxford. I think Kiffin's system suits him well. I think he has a great overall year. Leads Ole Miss again to that 7, 8, maybe 9 win mark. But yeah, kind of keeping on a similar theme, I guess. Mitch, we'll start with you. Give us your one surprise dark horse team you think that can really turn some heads this season if some things go their way.
I think we could go down to the Plains for this. I think Auburn and Hugh Freeze could really make some magic if Peyton Thorne is the guy at quarterback. They've been a quarterback away on offense, I think, for the last couple of seasons. That and the offensive line being improved, I think you could see Auburn reach 8 wins, and that would steal a lot of national headlines.
I'm going to Kentucky. There are 10-win seasons, not that far off for that program. They fell last year, obviously, but this has become a pretty sturdy program. I think they take a big upgrade at quarterback. If Devin Leary stays healthy, I think this team can get to double-digit wins again. But that's a big if behind that offensive line with his injury history. But I like Kentucky.
Yeah, similar boat with health being a major concern, but I'm with Arkansas. If KJ and Rocket both stay healthy throughout the season, and if that defense, probably the biggest question mark, do they piece things together enough to at least be above average, support Jefferson and Sanders in that offense, and at least not force them to get into shootouts every single week? I think Arkansas has the talent, especially on offense, to surprise people and get to that 8, 9 win mark and pull off an upset or two that they shouldn't. So I think that they're going to be another wild card that'll be interesting to watch. But yeah, lastly, kind of just to wrap it all up, some of our superlatives. We'll go through our championship game predictions, and then kind of our coach and players that we think are going to show out this year, newcomer of the year, and then also just kind of the game that we think is going to end up being the most entertaining or most meaningful, memorable, either from the atmosphere or from just the game itself during the season. So we'll start with you again, Mitch.
Yeah. So coach of the year. Oh boy. I mean, there's a lot of different directions you could go with this. I'm gonna say that it's Brian Kelly. And the reason why I'm gonna say that is because I think that the LSU Tigers do once again reach the SEC championship game. For my offensive player of the year, I think it could be if my projections happen right and everything that I've been saying is true. Connor Wegman could win this award, but I'm going to go with Jalen Daniels. I think LSU, I believe in them more as a complete team right now than I do Alabama out of the West. The defensive player of the year, I think we make it an LSU trifecta. I think Harold Perkins has a really, really amazing sophomore campaign. Newcomer of the year, and I'll be honest, we may have to come back to me because I lost my note on who my newcomer of the year was. But then game of the year, I think it's got to be LSU Alabama. I think the West has a lot of storylines again this year, and I think we could get kind of more of a defensive slugfest, like Dan, you were talking about earlier, I think that would be just a blast. Oh, Peyton Thorne. Peyton Thorne's my newcomer of the year at Auburn. But I think LSU Alabama could be the game of the year in the SEC.
Like I said, I've gone back and forth on Bama all offseason. I talked myself into them. I talked myself out of them. I talked myself into them. I'm currently at the height of the roller coaster. I'm currently bought in on Alabama. We'll see where I am by Labor Day, but I have Georgia, Alabama in the championship. That gives me Nick Saban as my coach of the year. We love to give Nick Saban his flowers in the SEC. I think offensive player of the year, I went back and forth between the two running backs in the West, Quinshon Judkins and Rocket Sanders. I think either couldn't have a 2,000-yard season, just workhorse backs in offenses that are going to snap the ball a ton and be good offenses. And defensive player of the year, Harold Perkins. I think he's going to absolutely stuff the stat sheet this year for the LSU defense. Just all kinds of impressive numbers. And, we'll see how playing linebacker affects his actual play, against the run and things, but going to produce a lot of numbers. Newcomer of the year, Isaac Ukwu, just mentioned, James Madison transfer. He's like 25, 24, been playing college ball for 7 years there, comes from a winning program, really, really good defensive end. I think he's going to help Ole Miss on defense there and put up a lot of sacks in the SEC. Game of the year, I'm going to go with Georgia at Tennessee. We saw that crowd last year just absolutely on fire for the Tuscaloosa game. It was a historic game, a game that will, be remembered for decades. I think we're going to see a similar kind of crowd. Will the game itself deliver? I think so. I think that stadium is going to be on fire for that matchup.
All right, and then I'll stick with the same championship game. I got chalk. I got Georgia over Alabama. I think that leads Georgia to get to the playoff over Bama. I think Bama is kind of edged out because of that loss at the end. Coach of the year, I'll stay with kind of my Arkansas dark horse. I think Sam Pittman, even if they get to 8 wins, I think has a strong argument for that. Offensive player of the year, sticking again with Arkansas, I'll say KJ Jefferson stays healthy the whole year, has a great year both running and throwing, puts up some good numbers. Defensive, I got Dallas Turner, just because I think you've heard a lot of hype surrounding him, obviously coming out of high school, and then limited action thus far at Bama, but I think he can have a Will Anderson-esque, season, especially with the position he plays and how talented he can be. Newcomer of the year, Devin Leary. I think in Kentucky, I think he steps in. I think he and Cohen hit it off. I don't think he's necessarily a, game breaker by any means, throwing for 300, 350 a game, but I think he is what Kentucky needs at the quarterback spot. And I think he steps in, has a great year. And then game of the year, I think we're gonna get another classic in College Station between Alabama and Texas A&M. I'm not gonna go on a limb and say who's gonna win that game. I'm gonna say that A&M probably will get the wrong end of the stick this time around as opposed to last time, but I think it's gonna be another one that comes down to it's a gritty, tough game. Comes down to a field goal or a late touchdown or something along those lines, and obviously a great atmosphere at Kyle Field anytime Bama walks into town. So. Had to give another A&M shout out there, but yeah, I think that about wraps up everything we had to cover today with the SEC. Just want to say again, thank you guys for listening to the Transfer Portal CFB podcast, presented as always by NoContextCFB. Feel free to leave some of your picks and hot takes in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, be sure to follow the social medias, which will all be in the description, as well as take a look at the preview magazine we talked about a little bit earlier. I'll still be on for about a month or so. And also, of course, thank you again, Dan and Mitch, for joining me again today. And looking at it now, we are only a couple weeks away from the end of talking season.
Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, it was a blast, Parker. Thanks, guys.
All right, see you guys.
Yeah.